For over a century, Baldwin Locomotive Works built the iron horses that conquered a continent. They were untouchable, unstoppable, and absolutely dominant. But when the world changed, Baldwin's leaders made a choice that would destroy everything their company had built. What happened next wasn't just corporate failure, it was systematic deception on a scale that would make modern scandals look like paperwork errors. And by the time anyone realized what was really happening, it was already too late. This is the story of how America's locomotive empire collapsed not from the outside, but from corruption and incompetence at the very top. Long before Baldwin Locomotive Works collapsed under its own weight, it was one of the most respected industrial names in the country. The company began in the 1830s when Matthias Baldwin built a small experimental engine. That single project evolved into a manufacturing powerhouse that eventually shaped the entire North American rail network. For more than a century, Baldwin didn't merely build locomotives. It defined what American locomotives were supposed to be. Railroads expanded at a pace no other industry could match, and Baldwin rose with them. As Western territories opened and cities connected through long-distance rails, Baldwin supplied engines for a wide range of roles: heavy freight, premier passenger trains, steep mountain districts, and industrial railways. A Baldwin locomotive wasn't just a machine, it was a symbol of reliability, craftsmanship, and national progress. When a railroad wanted to prove it was serious, it bought a Baldwin. By the early 1900s, the company's Philadelphia works had become one of the largest manufacturing complexes in the world. It employed thousands of workers, supported entire neighborhoods, and produced locomotives in numbers that dwarfed most competitors. Baldwin earned international respect as well. Foreign governments and private railways ordered engines by the dozens, trusting Baldwin to deliver machines that could survive punishing heat, extreme cold, or the unpredictable conditions of developing rail systems. Steam was the backbone of American transportation, and Baldwin understood steam better than almost anyone. Their engineers refined boiler designs, improved valve gear, and developed locomotives capable of hauling unimaginable loads across long distances. Railroad companies relied on Baldwin not only for production but for technical guidance. If a railroad needed an engine that could handle a specific grade or overcome a unique operating challenge, Baldwin's designers worked directly with them to create a suitable machine. That close partnership reinforced the company's authority and cemented its reputation for problem solving. This period of dominance made Baldwin feel like an institution rather than a business. Generations of workers passed through its shops, and families built entire careers around the security of long-term employment. Trade magazines praised Baldwin as a cornerstone of American industry, and newspapers routinely mentioned its activities the way they covered major steel or automotive companies. To many people, Baldwin represented stability, an enterprise too big, too established, and too technically capable to ever fail. But behind that stability, small signals of future trouble were already forming. The company's expertise in steam, which once felt like an unbeatable advantage, slowly became a limitation. When internal combustion began proving itself in marine engines and stationary industrial power, Baldwin's leadership treated the new technology cautiously and continued to prioritize steam as the long-term core of mainline railroading. At the same time, competitors were pouring money into diesel research and standard designs, slowly building an advantage that Baldwin underestimated. Baldwin continued to perfect what it already knew instead of adapting to what might come next. The company had survived downturns before, and that history encouraged complacency. Management assumed that railroads would always prefer large, custom-built steam locomotives because that had been true for decades. They also believed the company's long-standing relationships with railroads would shield them from new competition. Those assumptions weren't unreasonable at first, but they made Baldwin slower to recognize a shift that started to emerge in the 1930s and accelerated rapidly into the 40s. Diesel locomotives were simpler, cleaner, and cheaper to maintain, and railroads took notice. Baldwin responded, but too cautiously. Instead of building a diesel program equal to the companies leading that transition, Baldwin attempted to apply steam-era business habits to a technology that demanded a different mindset. Their first diesel efforts were technically competent, but lacked the refinement and commercial strategy needed to compete with firms like General Motors' electromotive division. While EMD integrated engines, generators, and controls into a polished turnkey product, Baldwin treated diesels as just another component in an existing catalog. During the steam diesel transition, Baldwin's internal culture became its own obstacle. Engineers who had spent their careers mastering steam viewed diesel design as unfamiliar territory, and leadership often made decisions through committees rather than decisive action. The company was still enormous, still respected, and still capable of producing impressive locomotives, but it was losing the clarity of purpose that once made it unstoppable. By the 1940s, Baldwin's legendary steam output was no longer enough to define its future. The irony was that Baldwin didn't collapse because steam disappeared overnight. Railroads continued buying steam engines into the post-war years, and Baldwin even produced some of the most advanced late-era steam locomotives in the country. The real problem was that Baldwin had grown too confident in its legacy and too hesitant to pivot when the market finally demanded something different. The empire remained powerful in appearance, but its foundation was beginning to shift. This sets the stage for what followed. When diesel became the standard and competition intensified, Baldwin tried to catch up. But instead of reinventing itself, the company began relying on decisions that hid problems rather than solved them. Decisions that would eventually erode the empire from the inside. By the time diesel power became the future of American railroading, Baldwin was already under pressure. Their steam business had supported a massive workforce, an enormous factory complex, and decades of engineering practices built around a kind of mechanical craftsmanship that didn't translate easily to diesel production. Internally, engineers knew the transition would be expensive and slow. Externally, shareholders expected Baldwin to remain the industry leader. Those two realities collided, and instead of dealing with the problem plainly, Baldwin's leadership chose to bury it. The trouble began with the company's production numbers. Early diesel orders lagged far behind EMD, yet Baldwin executives continued reporting optimistic projections to shareholders and the press. They inflated their expected delivery schedules, knowing the factory floor was jammed with partially built units that still had design issues. Delays became common, but the official story insisted everything was on schedule. Managers who raised concerns were told the company couldn't afford to appear weak during a technological shift this large. As the financial strain grew, the accounting department became part of the problem. Baldwin began moving losses into future quarters, delaying recognition of cost overruns, and shifting expenses between divisions to disguise the decline of its locomotive business. These weren't isolated mistakes, they were deliberate adjustments intended to buy time and keep investor confidence intact. Internal memos from the period show clear frustration from engineers who felt their warnings were being ignored or hidden. Baldwin went even further by manipulating performance claims to make struggling designs look competitive. Baldwin's diesel locomotives struggled to match EMD's standard road units, which benefited from a proven mass production platform and an integrated package of prime mover, electrical gear, and support. Instead of admitting this, Baldwin leadership emphasized optimistic performance claims and marketing language that did not match the day-to-day reliability and operating experience many railroads reported. Several railroads discovered within months that Baldwin's diesels underperformed compared to the company's marketing claims. Complaints started piling up, but Baldwin remained committed to the narrative that their diesel program was on the verge of a breakthrough. One of the most damaging patterns was Baldwin's habit of forcing prototype-level technology into full production. Instead of refining engines in test beds, they delivered units that still needed major internal changes. This created a cycle where customers had to become unofficial test partners. Every failure was treated as a minor issue, even when it required extensive redesigns. Railroads reported reliability troubles in areas like electrical gear, cooling, and consistency between supposedly similar units, reinforcing the sense that some Baldwin diesels were still evolving in the field rather than arriving as fully proven products. Baldwin leadership, however, continued informing investors that demand was strong and customer satisfaction was stable. At the same time, Baldwin leaned on short-term and opportunistic contracts that helped keep the order books from looking empty, even when the long-term demand picture was deteriorating. Some of these deals were with railroads that never intended to commit to long-term fleets, but were offered aggressive pricing or incentives that Baldwin couldn't realistically afford. The goal was simple: show movement and hide decline. Each quarter needed to appear better than the last, even as the company was sinking deeper into trouble. Things became worse when the company merged with Lima Hamilton. On paper, it was supposed to combine Baldwin's manufacturing scale with Lima's diesel experience. In practice, it created confusion over leadership, engineering direction, and finances. Baldwin absorbed Lima's problems while continuing to hide its own. Designs overlapped, accounting systems clashed, and both sides had competing visions for future locomotives. Rather than stabilizing the business, the merger magnified Baldwin's organizational problems, adding overlapping designs, clashing systems, and competing visions that made it even harder to present a clear, credible story about the future. Inside the company, morale deteriorated. Engineers felt their warnings were being ignored. Sales staff were pressured to promise capabilities the locomotives couldn't consistently deliver, and factory workers were pushed to meet unrealistic deadlines based on performance numbers that had been invented for shareholders rather than developed through testing. Meanwhile, executives assured investors that the company was positioned for a comeback. Externally, Baldwin still tried to project confidence. Press releases announced new diesel models with great optimism, even when those locomotives were based on unfinished or unreliable systems. Earnings calls spoke of temporary setbacks, expected fluctuations, and continued strong interest from major rail customers. In reality, those same customers were already shifting their purchases to EMD or ALCO, leaving Baldwin with only small niche orders and increasingly skeptical partners. By the early 1950s, the deceit was no longer about protecting the company's future. It was about protecting leadership from admitting how much damage had been done. Each manipulated financial report and each inflated performance claim pushed Baldwin further into a corner. Instead of addressing the core issues, the company tried to outrun them, and the gap between Baldwin's public image and its actual capabilities grew to the point where collapse became inevitable. The truth didn't come out all at once. It unraveled in pieces, and every piece revealed something worse than the last. Baldwin's financial statements started showing inconsistencies that auditors couldn't explain away. Suppliers complained about unpaid invoices. Railroads noticed that promised delivery dates kept slipping further into the future. None of this was supposed to happen to a company as established as Baldwin, but the warning signs kept stacking up, and eventually the story inside the company could no longer be hidden from the outside world. By the mid-1950s, the order books were thin, and the few diesels Baldwin managed to sell were already developing reliability issues that strained their relationships with major railroads. Warranty claims climbed. Service departments were overwhelmed. Mechanics from the railroads themselves reported problems that clashed with the glowing performance numbers Baldwin had been distributing for years. The industry was shifting fast, and Baldwin was stuck with engines that didn't have enough power, burned too much fuel, and needed far more maintenance than their competitors. Behind closed doors, executives knew the company couldn't sustain the gap between what they advertised and what they could deliver. As cash flow tightened, Baldwin pushed ahead with the merger that became its last major gamble. The combination with Lima Hamilton was supposed to stabilize everything: larger scale, more engineering talent, and a broader customer base. Instead, it exposed just how far behind Baldwin had fallen. The two companies brought together different cultures, incompatible engineering systems, and separate management philosophies that clashed almost immediately. Projects stalled while departments argued over designs and responsibilities. Money was spent before results were produced. What Baldwin needed was a clean, disciplined restructuring. What it got was a chaotic partnership that drained resources even faster. Railroads saw the instability almost immediately. Many of them were already hesitant to buy from Baldwin, and now they had another reason to stay away. They shifted nearly all new orders to EMD or ALCO, companies that offered not only better engines, but clearer futures. A locomotive is a 20 to 30-year investment, and no railroad wanted to be stuck with an orphaned fleet supported by a manufacturer that might not survive the decade. Baldwin's sales team could feel the hesitation every time they picked up the phone. Meetings became longer, decisions became shorter. Railroads listened politely, then placed their orders elsewhere. Inside Baldwin, morale fell as quickly as revenue. Engineers who had once worked on world-class equipment were now asked to revise old designs with budgets so small that major improvements were impossible. Skilled workers on the factory floor watched entire shifts disappear as production lines slowed to a crawl. Some departments consolidated, others shut down entirely. The sense of pride that defined Baldwin's identity faded, replaced by uncertainty about whether the company would still exist next month. The decisive blow came when the numbers could no longer be massaged or explained away. Mounting losses, creditor pressure, and tighter scrutiny made it clear that the business model no longer worked. Shareholders were furious, creditors lost confidence, and suppliers stopped extending credit. Without parts, Baldwin couldn't finish locomotives. And without finished locomotives, Baldwin couldn't invoice customers. Without invoices, there was no cash left to operate. Everything that had been hidden now stood in plain view, and it shattered what little faith the industry still had in the company. Baldwin tried to push out one more generation of diesel locomotives, hoping a breakthrough would change its trajectory. But the designs arrived too late and too underdeveloped to sway anyone. Railroad technology had already passed the point where Baldwin could reasonably catch up. The market had moved on. Baldwin hadn't. What followed wasn't dramatic in the Hollywood sense. There was no single day when the power was shut off or the doors were locked. The collapse came slowly, in layers, as each remaining source of stability eroded until nothing was left to support the weight of the operation. Departments were dissolved, production was halted. The company that once built locomotives by the thousands now struggled to justify producing even a handful. By the mid-50s, Baldwin's years as a locomotive builder were effectively over. Production ended under the Baldwin-Lima-Hamilton banner, and the name shifted into other heavy equipment ventures instead of mainline rail power. The empire that once supplied engines to railroads across an entire continent had come to an end.